Hello and welcome to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, where we talk about leading remote teams, online collaboration, and working in distributed organizations. This podcast is brought to you by Virtual Not Distant, where we help managers and teams transition to an office-optional approach. Find out everything we do over at virtualnotdistant.com and check out our show notes and pictures of our lovely guests over on the podcast page. It's great to have you here, listeners. Let's get on with the show. Hello and welcome to episode 264 of the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, which today is all about learning, and learning mainly in distributed organizations, but not looking at it just from the point of view of how we learn when we're apart, but also about taking charge of our learning as individuals, because especially when we work apart from our colleagues and other people in the organization, we cannot leave it to chance. We cannot leave it to learning by osmosis because people are around us in the office or wherever. We really need to be very deliberate about it. So we need to have a higher level of self-awareness about what works for us, what we need, etc. So today's episode, it covers all of that. And what I've done is I was very lucky to chair a panel back in October 2020 for Agile Tour London with four people that I that I hold in the highest of regards, who are Marcus Wermuth, who for regular listeners, you will have heard him speak on our show before. He is someone that I've met online, like many of my new friends, and who I really enjoy talking to on the podcast. Also Legge, who I also met online and who's also been quite a regular guest on the show, and Gonçalo Silva, who also came onto the show last year to talk about asynchronous communication, and then Beth Maguire, who I haven't had the pleasure yet of having a one-to-one conversation on the show. I hope she will, but who I met through Richard McKinnon, who is the co-host or the main host of my Pocket Psych, where I also podcast. So wonderful. They're all heavily invested, not just in their own learning, but in how they can help others in the organization to learn. So Beth is a learning and development specialist. She's spent most of her professional life training, studying, practicing various forms of helping other people develop. Gonçalo works for Doist, and he's one, if I remember correctly, might be getting it wrong, one of the first 3 people who were employed by Doist, and how that has grown. Morgan is working for Convert, and she's one of the people who helped the company adopt holacracy, which is a way of self-management. And Marcus, he's a manager of managers, and he's training to be a coach, and he's really looking at how to help others develop as well as his own development. So we are in great company today. So all I've done, I've just edited a little bit the panel discussion, so that's about 35 minutes. I hope you'll enjoy it. If you're new to distributed work, to remote work, I think you might take some things that you can experiment with yourself, some ideas. And if you have been in the space for a while, then I hope you will enjoy some of the higher level discussions as well. And just hearing from these very seasoned professionals, really, regardless of the remote, they are just very good at what they do. So yes, we have a mixture of listeners. So if you're new to the show, welcome. And if you're still here with us, wow, thank you very much, because there's so many podcasts about remote work now and some very good stuff out there. So before that, though, I had the pleasure of talking for about 10 minutes to Jennifer Riggins, one of the people running Agile Tour London, where this conversation you're going to hear came from. But now they are planning their next Agile conference, and it's actually Advanced Agile. She will say what that means. And this is the Aginext conference of 2021, which will take place on the 17th, 18th and 19th of March 2021. So if you're listening around that time, you can still buy some tickets. And I was talking to Jen because this is the second time they've had to run this conference online. And well, I'll let you hear what she has to say, but she's also learned a lot. Experiential learning, learning by doing, learning by experimenting, learning by just having to do it differently. So Jennifer Riggins will kick us off, and after her, we'll go straight into the panel, and I will introduce the panel guests properly over at the other side. And I'll be back. I'll be back after the panel just to share some more stuff that's going on. So Jen, Aginext 2021? 2021.
What year is it? What is time? We have no idea. It's okay.
What's it looking like? What have you got planned for this year? Actually, let me just go back a bit. Last year, did you manage to do this one in person in March 2020?
No, we decided 5 days before to move it online. It was a bit of a scramble. That's because the lockdown was 2 days after our conference would have ended. The London lockdown would have began, and it just became quite a scramble. It was heightened emotion, but on the other side, I guess it was kind of good because we were the first ones. So it was a very supportive environment. Yeah, we messed up on some stuff. We didn't really understand how to run a conference via Zoom, and you really need separate accounts. Definitely had some kerfuffles, but it was a very forgiving environment. And everyone, it was new. It was back March 2020. It was when people were like, oh, I better go make bread. Yeast. It was a novelty then. So it's definitely more pressure now. Our third conference, because you were a part of Agile Tour London in October, we had a few blips, but not many. But, you know, there's still always technological issues, but hopefully we've got them all ironed out now with monthly meetups to practice all the tools and to test out new tools. And now I think we're ready for what we're calling an anti-webinar, because I am a tech journalist and I'm just bored. Well, from a tech journalism standpoint, being able to pause recordings and take notes is great, but that's not a conference, that's a webinar. And that's what a lot of tech companies are doing now. So we're trying to do an anti-webinar full-on engagement experience.
Yeah, so tell us, Aginext, and I love the aginext.io as the website. The website, if listeners want to listen to, is 2021.aginext.io. What are some of the things that you are looking most forward to in it?
Well, it's interesting. We still have half Zoom because a keynote is a keynote, and Zoom is a completely useful tool for something like that. But then we're using a tool, David Gamel and a bunch of our awesome volunteers from the Aginext community, which is based out of between Meetup and Slack at this point because it isn't in person anymore. But they have tested a bunch of tools and came across Spatial Chat. And for a couple months now, they've been running meetups, and it's basically like you're at a conference, or you can make it a meeting room. You can make it whatever you want, and you have control, because the problem with breakout rooms is someone else is facilitating that. So you're not a full participant. You're kind of being moved around like a piece on a board. In Spatial Chat, you move yourself. So you only can hear people that you are physically near. You just move your little head bubble, and you can only talk to them. So if you want to go in the corner, it makes it great. We're going to use it for 1/4 of our conference is going to be networking interaction activities. That can be anything from random chats, fish bowls. Panels will still be on Zoom because, again, the recording, we like to live stream them to YouTube. And then Spatial Chat, especially, I think it's going to be interesting for workshops, because especially when you have like an advanced Agile audience, people want to experiment. People want to run into corners and do new things, and then not let everybody see, so you even get the privacy. And then there's a loudspeaker that you can call everyone back in, just like a facilitator would in a regular event. So it's actually a lot of fun.
So taking me back a bit with Spatial Chat. So what does it look like, or at least how are you setting it up?
It's a virtual venue. I don't know that we've actually decided the background yet. We still have almost a month. We've tested some backgrounds that don't work, like the first meetup, like official, not experimental, but a real Aginext Mingle Cafe. they did an Alice in Wonderland theme, which was super fun because everyone could wear hats and you can have fun. But it turned out that background wasn't good because it was a very chaotic background and you kind of get lost in it. So you need we've learned a simpler background like you would at a conference center. But then from there, people all start clustered in the middle. And then you just drag your own head. It's really intuitive. I hope you'll join us, Pilar. It's really fun. And so you can be like, top left corner, talk about psychological safety. Bottom right corner is going to discuss DevOps. Upper right's just going to play a game, things like that. So you have that ability that people can just move themselves. So they can break out around topics they want to discuss at the same way you would at a workshop. There are many ways I think workshop facilitators might break people into groups or allow them to self-organize, which is foundational to Agile.
So as well as having the ability to walk from one, let's call it a breakout room, to another, because I think you can do that in Zoom, but I don't know how it works yet.
It's physically and it's not visual. So we're even calling every room like we're debating between if we're just going to do like one floor 1, 2, 3, or if we're going to give them like tricky names, fun names. I'm not sure which will be easier to people. I welcome feedback. And I'm sure we'll get it amply. There's an agile value feedback through and iterate through the conference, but it just allows people to move themselves. So again, it's even a safer space because we always say at our in-person conferences, this is for you. So if you're not into a talk or workshop for whatever reason, leave your judgment aside because that's what the feedback form's for. Please fill out feedback forms. Always a struggle to get. But you can just get up and leave. There's no judgment and you can join a different conversation. And that's how you can do it now without even people maybe noticing that you're leaving one conversation and going to the other. You can do it more discreetly. It also allows for people to be more wallflowers. There are still people that want to observe more than interact. So we want to make sure that it balances everything.
Yeah, that's a very good idea because I would be one of those. I would be one of those who observe and don't interact. And one thing that you noticed last year that I saw you doing during the Agile Tour London was that you saw that the virtual coffee spaces or the random open chats for people that people were participating more if you gave it some structure or gave them some themes. How was that? What did you discover around that?
Absolutely. We still in like our hallway, we've always struggled to get people to go there. I think part of that is because we were trying to schedule it during breaks instead of making it part of, even at our keynotes and our talks now, we have all talks are half an hour, keynotes 45, because they're still keynotes. They're quite structured still. And then at the end, we put 15-minute breaks that are in that same Zoom room so people can continue to talk about that topic without the fear of being videotaped and things. So with this, we are going to still do some random coffees, which is easier because we can just tell these 3 people go in this corner, these 3 people go in this corner. But we're also going to do a lot more structured topics because people do feel more comfortable showing up for that. I think the random coffees, especially first thing in the kind of morning, it depends on where you are in the world, is very interesting because that also gives you a chance to experiment with the new tool. So there's a reason to go to them more, but it's based around self-organization. So we'll have a fishbowl and it should be really fun for a fishbowl because it's very clear. You can literally put fake chairs in the room. For people that don't know, a fishbowl usually has 4 or 5 chairs. So you have 5 chairs, one stays empty all the time. And you talk about a topic, and if someone else sits down in that 5th chair, somebody else has to leave the conversation so you can to move into observer mode, basically. And so you can discuss around the topic. I first encountered them physically in person at a bunch of tech environmental meetups in London that they do quick presentations at the beginning. They're usually very informative. And then they have a huge fishbowl discussion period. So it's a very fun activity, and that works very well online without having to now turn off and on cameras, and it just becomes a bit less participatory in Zoom.
Nice. I really like that you're going to be trying out some stuff, and it sounds really good. It sounds like you can go to this conference for content, or you can go for the online experience as well, or the networking, whatever. But I like that it's got two very distinct value propositions in it. And tell me, are you running a lean coffee as part of this, Jen?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. But I actually haven't decided where, because I'm running the lean coffee. I guess I don't have to. Lean coffee seems to work well on Zoom. I run it monthly. So we use a tool called Lean Coffee Table that is given to us for free, though it's a paid tool. Usually my lean coffees are not the most structured facilitation as the repeat customers come. And I run that actually through the Digital Leadership Meetup in London. So we use that tool, and then I'm not the most strict about times and things, but a lean coffee, for those that don't know, is a self-organized conversation, typically time-boxed, that people decide the topics, and it's a safe environment that people can just talk about issues they bring up, and usually I allow the person that suggested the topic, and then we vote on those topics using a tool. It's a great way to just bounce ideas off each other, and it's usually a close-knit community. So it's a lot of fun, lean coffees. But I don't think it needs to be in Spatial Chat for that one, just because I know how to run it in Zoom.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if you've got something that works, you know how to do it. If it works sometimes, well, there's always is there an improvement to be seen? But also if it works sometimes, it's just good to, when you've got so much other experimentation going on as well, we want to hang on to some stuff. So Jen, so this is on Wednesday, 17th of March and 18th of March, 2021, and Friday, 19th of March, 3 days.
It's 3 short days, because things we found in running online conferences is, even if you give them breaks, people often don't take breaks, and we think that's really important. So we do shorter days. So besides the extra stuff, like if you want to get on early and chat with people and things like that, its core conference runs about 1 to 6:30 each day, UK time. So it also opens up for North Americans to join, or Southeast Asians to join later in their evening. People are very welcome, and it should be a lot of fun. I think we have a really excellent lineup this year. We have 4 keynotes that are all unique. We're talking about only advanced Agile and beyond themes. So we're getting into what is the post-Agile age, how to scale properly, what is Agile HR, talking about psychological safety, which we did talk about at the last conference too, but I think it's such a hot topic right now. So psychological safety and inclusion, and DevOps, of course, that's the next hot thing after Agile, isn't it? Or maybe there's something after that. That's what we're all experimenting. So I hope people will join us and get ready to try out their team's next experiment in a unique way, where we try to break out of those 4 walls, the 4 2D walls of our Zoom windows.
Wonderful. So listeners, again, if you're interested in any of the advanced Agile stuff, I will just call it stuff because I am so far away from the subject matter, but all of this sounds amazing. And I'm just looking at the program and there's such variety. Or indeed, if you just want to experiment and experience something that you might not have experienced before, being online, you know, the investment in time without the travel is great. So I recommend that you check out 2021.aginext.io. And if you want to connect with Jennifer Riggins, what's your social media stuff?
At JK Riggins, whether on LinkedIn or Twitter, is great. JKRIGGINS. And may I say, Pilar, I think you're actually very agile, and agility is about adaptability at scale and specifically involving culture. So I actually think the work you do with remote and hybrid teams is very much about helping them adapt and help their culture. So I think you're actually very agile. You just don't know it.
Yeah, the mindset does appeal to me a lot. And I think that it's interesting. The online space I've always thought was so ready for the agile practice. So yes, okay. Yes, I agree. Thank you for the reminder. Excellent. Thanks, Jen.
Thank you so much, Pilar.
I'm going to start by introducing Beth Maguire, who is a learning and development professional and a neuroscience results-based coach. And Beth has worked in the area of learning and behavior change for over 10 years. And recently, she's finished a course in psychotherapy. She actually focuses her efforts on building globally inclusive and accessible solutions and experiences to help people grow and thrive professionally and personally, mainly to unlock their full potential to maximize their performance, success, and well-being. So actually perfect for this panel. So Beth, as part of your introduction, can you tell us where you are today and your favorite way of learning?
Yeah, hi everyone, and thank you for welcoming to this panel. Very excited, great discussion. I am in Dublin in Ireland, but I suppose that's what I love about now being virtual. We have this amazing global panel and group around, and we're really accessible to everyone. I suppose for learning, I think it's probably the moment of need. So when I learn the most is like when the problem is big or the change is big and I need to get a solution and the urgency is rather large. And then I think in terms of the process, I love learning from people. So you'll probably gather the fact that I'm on this panel. I love engaging, meeting people and learning from others as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And next we have Gonçalo Silva, who's the CTO at Doist, creators of Todoist and Twist, and champions of asynchronous communication. And Gonçalo's been working remotely for over a decade and managing remote teams for most of that time. Everything is, I have a friend who says nothing happens more than 10 years ago. So maybe this is the thing. So Gonçalo, welcome. Where are you? And what is your preferred way of learning?
Well, I'm in Porto, Portugal, sunny today, thankfully. And the way I learn, I like to learn by doing things. So, and I've learned how to manage a team doing this. I've learned how to manage managers of teams by doing it. The thing that I try to be is very aware of the various stages when we learn things, right? The first stage when everything seems easy and, we're overconfident usually. The second stage where everything seems super hard we basically have a lot of ramp up to do, and the final stage where we're finally growing and comfortable in the process. Being aware of this helps me learn on the job, so to speak, not in an incompetent way.
Oh, nice. Thank you. Lots of there. Marcus, we're going to introduce Marcus Wermuth, who works as an engineering manager at Buffer, the fully distributed company, which is very well known and respected in the remote space for its transparency and thought leadership. And Marcus' current focus is leadership and management in distributed companies, and especially how we can build more psychological safe teams in a digital world. He's also a leadership coach trained by the Coactive Training Institute, and he writes a lot, you should read his blog, about virtual leadership. He mentors and coaches other remote supervisors. Wow, we're going to learn so much today, audience, and facilitates international workshops about management in distributed teams. So welcome, Marcus. Where are you and what's your preferred mode of learning?
Yeah, hey, thanks for having me. Excited to be it. I said it before, it feels like being in a group of friends here with all the panelists and you, Pilar. I'm in Munich, Germany right now. And how I learn, I want to give a philosophical answer first. I think I like to learn by living, but I have to agree with Gonçalo that I definitely like learning by doing. And if there's a big problem ahead of me, I kind of like to dig in and read a lot. So reading for me is also kind of a big learning.
Yeah, you read a lot. Follow Marcus for reading recommendations. Thank you, Marcus. And we also have Morgan Legge, who's formerly the Director of Operations and current Head of Sales and Success at Convert.com, which is 100% remote first SaaS company that makes an A/B testing tool. She initially came to Convert to transition them from a flat organization to holacracy. So loads of learning involved there. So here comes the stock question for you. Where are you and how do you prefer to learn, Morgan?
I am located in Montreal, Canada, and today we are joining this live stream with my dog.
Yay!
Who you're going to hear. He suddenly woke up. It's overcast with beautiful fall day, and I love to learn by doing, but that's actually the second way. The first way is having really robust conversations, dynamic, deep dive conversations with people, and preferably with maybe like a whiteboard or some, sketch paper, and really, involve your whole being in that. And then the follow-up to that is to jump in and learn by doing.
Thank you very much. If I could summarize, and when it happens seems to be important, learning from people, learning by doing, learning by living, and having robust conversations and something to capture those conversations with. So we've set the scene. Let's hear a bit from the panel about what you do. So what does your job entail, your role? Let's turn specifically to your role in the organization. So tell us a bit about it and what you've had to learn along the way and how that happens. So a little bit of your experiences. I was going to, well, actually, let me start with Marcus because his microphone is open. So Marcus, what does your role entail, and what have you had to learn along the way?
Yeah, so my role entails a lot, and especially around people management. I'm an engineering manager, much more focused on the management part, less on the engineering part. And I fell into this role, funnily enough, by being an engineer and raising my hand and saying like, hey, we're worried about our team. There's no one leading this team. There's no one managing this team. And Buffer was in a little transition period at that time. So yeah, things were shifting and I kind of raised my hand. And so I fell into this job, not really knowing what people management is. So there was a lot I had to learn. And initially what you default to is you read books, you read articles, you talk to other people. So that's what I did. Or in that transition period, I kind of got all the books that I needed to read upon. I chatted to other people in similar roles that weren't necessarily remote, but I wasn't so much concerned about the distributed part rather than the people management part. So I chatted to other people. I kind of built my little support group and kind of grew from there. One big thing that I did too was getting a leadership coach. And for me, that was kind of the start of a more transformational period for myself, even until now. Because I'm a big fan, and we might touch on this later, I don't know, of developmental theory, where you go through certain stages in your life and where you look onto things in a different way. So I think initially I was very concerned with learning all the tools, all the processes and all the different things. But I started to notice that, yeah, it's not just about that. And this is rather the easy part. It's more so about, the self-awareness and learning about yourself that makes you a better leader. And that made me a better manager in that perspective. Yeah.
Thank you. So there's a lot there about very interesting that you're conscious of the learning cycle, whatever that is, which means you need different kind of things. I'm paraphrasing for you. Just anyone else? Does that resonate? Is it different to someone else? Beth, you're nodding.
I think for me, my learning is kind of at that place of uncomfort. So I always say, like, there's tons of learning, like as Marcus talked about, having coach, going through studying psychotherapy, being a psychotherapist coach. I learned so much. But the ones that really stick out for me are often those like really uncomfortable moments. I'm at Hubspot now just 2 years. So the first year was definitely a learning curve. And I came in to be responsible to build out our professional and personal development program globally. And I worked consultancy side for years, done this with many companies. And I was like, piece of cake, just do the same. Did a bit of research, like, copy and paste. Mm-hmm. So number one, made an assumption, which we all know is like the first failure in place of you should not be. And I think for me, when I think about the learning lens, or maybe the 5 moments of need of learning, I definitely hit that place of having a really big problem. I wasn't getting the buy-in. I realized you can have the best product in the world, you can have an amazing vision, but if you don't have stakeholder buy-in, it's not there. And I had always had that. So I just forgot about it. In consulting, it was always high tier 1, urgency, importance, and all that good stuff. So for me, the first step was recognizing the problem, seeing my pitfalls and assumptions, and actually getting uncomfortable with that, and then trying to solve that essentially. And that's also looking at, we talk about a lot of the times of learning is around change, which is obviously really relevant in this year. For us in the pandemic, for me, it was the change going from consultancy to in-house. I just didn't think about that being so big. So really getting under that and actually starting to reassign my, expectations, going to stakeholders and saying things like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is this? Everyone will say developing and learning is 10 out of 10. But then when you say, how urgent is this? Well, then suddenly it's like, oh, well, I have this, I have this, I have this. It's the same reason developing ourselves, time is always the thing that gets in the way. I intended to go to that webinar, I intended to listen, but then the kids started screaming, the dog started barking, or whatever it might be next as well. So really coming to terms with that, and then really setting my plan and doing the research, talking to other L&D folk and learning from others, and then applying a plan that's far more likely to succeed in the environment that I've taken. So a lot of uncomfortable learning, but probably valuable.
And can I just pick on something up? So Marcus works for a fully distributed company, and very interesting that what we heard from Marcus about how he learned and experiences didn't have location. It doesn't matter, the location. Beth, you work for a company that has both her headquarters and the remote employees are a third of, of the office space. Was there any learning to be done around that?
Yeah, hugely. I think I'd always be very in touch with looking at virtual. And one of the things we say is it's so important to be inclusive and accessible. So we wanted learning to be, you're accessible wherever you are, whatever time zone. If you're a parent and want to dial in at 12 p.m. because you're, minding your kids at home, just accessible to all the different groups. And so really thinking about how we can have the just-in-time learning demand, but then still meeting the needs, especially in times like this, where people, as we've all talked here, people want to connect and learn from each other. We've all referenced that too. So making sure you have offerings and things around there as well. So it definitely opened our minds. You find by default, you might just set up a session in the headquarters and you're excluding instantly by doing that. So rethinking and not making assumptions. So there was definitely a huge amount of intent behind that.
Excellent. Thank you. Gonçalo, your company is again another fully distributed, isn't it?
Yeah.
And what is your role and what did you have to learn?
Well, actually, I see myself in the words of Marcus as well. I found myself accidentally taking on things, which actually led me to think a little bit about risk. Learning is also about taking risks in some instances. And in my case, there were different stages. We did most of what we did so far a bit accidentally. In the beginning, we were just having fun building a product. Eventually, we had too many people for not having any leadership. So I took on team leadership. Eventually, we had too many teams without a joint culture and leadership. So I took on the CTO role to kind of glue together the technical engineering side of the company and the people management too, like Marcus has said. The thing that, looking back, I think is also important, besides making the time that Beth mentioned and really well, we always, underestimate how much effort learning takes. And it always feels very important, but we don't prioritize it very consistently. And as leaders, we need to create this room in our teams and in our companies. But eventually, there is some risk taking, right? You need to be open to not know something, to maybe even look like a fool while you're doing it. So yeah, this is also an important part of learning, is being available to feel this way.
Thank you. Thanks, Gonçalo, for the reflections. Morgan, how about you? Tell us a little bit about your role or your latest role, however you wanna frame it, and tell us some of the things that you had to learn as you went along.
My most recent role is the head for sales and success at Convert. And, my journey to this place it's interesting, but I'd actually prefer to focus on what I started doing at Convert, because I think that kind of shapes the whole context for everything. So I came to Convert initially to move us from a flat organization into a holacracy powered organization, which basically is an operating system that leverages distributed authority to grow your company. And we did that, but I came on board not knowing anything. I didn't even know what holacracy was. And it was an entirely bootstrapped project. And for me, the part that was really intriguing was this opportunity to be paid to learn, to figure it out. And the journey through that, not only filled with curiosity, but I think the thing that is really, really important is having the intellectual humility to be able to go in, learn, and make mistakes, and then know that you can learn so much from so many different people. And when you go through that cycle, you can't fear failure. You can't fear looking silly or any of those things. You have to be, at least for me, willing to go in and jump in. Definitely, our implementation was filled with a lot of false starts. I kind of related to what Beth was saying. I came in, it was I learned everything I could about holacracy. I started doing it and implementing it. And I realized partway through our journey that like I had created this like beautiful graphic of what I thought Convert should look like, but that's not what holacracy is. You know, it's a reflection of where you are, and then the people in the organization are the ones that change that based on the need. And so that was a big learning to kind of step back and have to change your plan and realize, hey, you know what, I just went through this months of work and this isn't correct. Yeah.
Nice. So with all that in mind, seeing how varied it is, what different things you're all paying attention to, because we're kind of all in the same space about how we learn and wanting to basically, the four of you are taking charge of your learning, but how it's coming out is slightly different. So with that in mind, how much should we be formalizing learning for individuals in an organization? Or what's the responsibility of the organization to help the individual, and what are the different ways of doing that? So I will take this as a discussion. So the four of you, if you want to speak, raise your hand, because I can see all of you now. Morgan is going first.
It's great to have processes in place, but I think at the very core, you have to have a culture of learning, and you have to give a space for that. So it's well and good to say, oh, there's this money available and you go through this process. But if people aren't sharing, there isn't, especially in a remote team, people aren't making noise about what they're doing, and there's no space to share that, it doesn't really mean much. I mean, I think part of the magic about learning is that we can do that, and then we're also helping to build that curiosity and share it with the people that we collaborate with.
Mm-hmm. Great. Marcus.
I wanted to plus one what we were saying about, Buffer, we have the growth mindset fund, a certain amount of money that you get every year, but there's always some people who don't use it because they don't know what to use it for. They don't know what to do with it. So if there's no one talking about it, no one like mentioning what's possible, it won't be used. And in addition to that, I think maybe another talking point there was also that Robert Keegan, I'm obsessed with him right now, who like talks about this adult development theory. Just in a talk that he recently had on YouTube, I saw that he mentioned that leadership actually has this really good potential to like build this foundation for development or growth in a company. So I feel like it's also a certain responsibility that you as a leader have to kind of help your team, help your direct reports or the people around you to kind of leverage and lean into that. So I definitely think that we as leaders, I know this is my role, but we have kind of a responsibility to lean into this and help others to kind of develop.
Great. Gonçalo.
Yeah, I think these are all good points, and I completely agree with them. We have some control over the culture. Leading by example is a great point, but also the structures and the incentives we create. For example, the check-in mechanism we use at Doist is like just once a week, totally async, but it's public. But besides focusing on the work that we have done and that we plan on doing, it also focuses on the most important thing you've learned last week. And this kind of like creates this culture where even if you're not maybe investing a lot in learning, you see all of these people sharing all of these interesting things and you want to participate in that. So it's actually quite common that we see people ramp up within this process. And then as leaders, I also think we have some responsibility to create room for learning. And we have done this poorly in the past at Doist, for example, where we talk about how learning is super important and we must always be learning and growing, but then we're always overloaded with work, right? All day, every day. And there is no room for anything. So for example, something I'm really proud of, we've started doing this year, and it's going really well, is blocking 1 month per year for people to do whatever projects they want. The only thing we want is that they have a plan and they have some kind of deliverable, even if the deliverable is learning something. But this really puts people in the driver's seat to have control over their own project. And we see a lot of people learning a lot of new things through this. But of course, it's an investment. It's 1 month per year. But still, we're getting a lot of value out of this, because if we don't invest in our people, who will?
Yeah, nice. So really put your money where your mouth is, and really give very strong signals if that's the culture you want to build. I just want to hang on to something. So Morgan talked about the spaces to share, and Gonçalo, you started to talk about something very specific about you do something once a week where you all share what you've learned or something like that. What does that look like in your distributed organization?
For us, it's a thread. So we know a lot of teams use different work methodologies. They have different mechanisms for check-in. We have these threads where each person from each team shares what they have done last week and what they plan to do this week. Originally, this was just a check-in tool, but then we added this learning section, like, what interesting thing have you learned last week? And it's kind of like repurposing the tool a little bit, but it's been amazing to see how much people learn and how varied these topics can be.
So you can have big initiatives and incentives. You were talking about incentives also, Gonçalo, to learn, which are like 1 month that you dedicate to whatever. But you can also have small ones like changing the word and saying, what interesting thing. Okay, oh, right, that makes me stop, reflect, share, all part of that learning cycle. Yeah. Anything else from the panel? Beth?
I think the word formalize, I think I have an adversity to, because I think it's that structure, it's in the classroom. But I do think there's a bit of both and, which I think a lot of us are alluding to in this discussion. And again, a lovely quote, but I would say, like, the deeper the roots, the greater the fruits. I think we need a foundation. So just a lot of us have explained examples of quick growing companies where you kind of fell into a role and you probably learned the most there. But we always have this debate of, well, how much pain is okay to learn and how much giving them complete autonomy and flexibility is okay versus, come on. We've all now had to relearn the same thing because we're not sharing the learnings. We're having silos here. We're duplicating efforts. So I think this is a really big part. And I think so it's kind of the both and, as we talked about, starting to create the culture of learning, leaders practicing what they preach, experimenting, failing, and that good stuff. And then again, as we talked about those initiatives, we do loads of those really nice things from your learning of the week. And thinking about, the same reason Google reviews are really popular. When we go on a TripAdvisor, we check the reviews. How can we start to share those reviews, how you spent your tuition fees or what learnings you have and how you can share that, because that's going to be really powerful to get people engaged as well.
So as people who are in the lead in some shape or form, how do you experiment and fail as a leader? How does that look and how does that create that culture of learning and role modeling?
Transparently.
And what do you mean by that, Morgan? Like you become like a hologram?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you model what you want to see from other people, right? Like, so if I'm not taking the initiative to use the budget that Convert gives me to spend it however I want, and I have that money left in the pot, then what am I teaching the other people that I am working with, right? Like, it seems kind of, it doesn't work, so I think that, going through and sharing, like this panel's talked about, sharing what you're doing, what you're learning, how you fail, right? Maybe the missteps is super, super important.
And what you're also providing the space to learn, not people to be learning from their own experiences, but they're learning from you also. This is something that the informal learning, and this is what I think people who've just gone into distributed or remote because of COVID are worried about when they talk about culture. I think sometimes it's about that some of the behaviors that we see, they're afraid that we can't see them anymore. So something like a learning culture needs to be managed differently, I imagine. Marcus, you're nodding wisely.
No, I mean, the culture is very important. I mean, we live our values. We don't just put them on our wall. And we have one of our values being like self-improvement. And, that shows in various aspects. And I think that's kind of a key thing, like living that culture and really trying to map it into all the various fields in your company, whether that's leadership, that's just getting together and all the things. I think, yeah, it has to be ingrained in those, even the small moments. Otherwise, it's just going to be hard.
Yeah, excellent. Good. Well, I would like to ask a panelist if you have any questions for each other. But of course, before giving you the floor to ask questions to each other, I'd like to see if there are any questions in the chat. Any questions from the chat? Anything you would like to ask Morgan about how she learned in her organization when she had to actually learn a whole new structure, or Beth, how she manages both the in-office space with the remote, or Gonçalo and Marcus about their the journey to managing a distributed team, or a team actually, or anything about their learning, you are very welcome to send the, okay. So there is a question here. Have you done these do what you want to learn days? Panel, anything resonates there?
I think a good few companies do this, and I think we copied a lot of this from, I think it was LinkedIn and a few others, but different departments do it differently, or we have what we call grow days, because, you know, you're evolving and growing. And we really invite anyone to do whatever. And kind of I think we talked about this earlier, we have tuition fee that you can spend to go off and do more in-depth course. It might be that you're doing something on your own well-being and you're learning about yourself. That can be very different. And then the one main thing is what we're going back to again, is to create that culture of learning. The expectation is you then come back and you share, and you either recommend, or you know, what was your top tip? What was the one thing you could take away? So we're trying to cultivate oh yeah, I don't just have to learn by reading a book or sitting in a classroom. There's other things, and getting inspired by others as well. And I think it's just a lovely message of autonomy and, you know, being vulnerable and open to learning, which is the environment that will cultivate that learning.
Yeah. And Marcus, you've done a lot of taking, like you talked about the leadership coach right at the beginning in your introduction, because this fits in quite nicely with that. I mean, it's not a specific point in time like Beth is suggesting, but how free did you feel to do that in the organization, or this is something that you did on the side, something that you shared?
Well, the first coach, that Buffer changed a bit since then, but the first coach that I took, I just did on my own. I paid it on my own. I looked for it on my own. But Buffer since then changed, and like our growth mindset fund that we didn't have at that time can be used for coaching now. We have various resources and coaches that, you know, we can approach. But yeah, I decided that on my own, and it was probably the best decision on that journey of growth and learning for me.
Mm-hmm. And why was it the best decision?
Because it's not working or learning about the processes and the tools, but learning about me and being a manager, working with people. You should first work on yourself and become a better human in that sense, and then work with other people. So that's why for me, it kind of put me in that direction.
Beth, that's your specialism. Help me professionally grow professionally. So how do we help people grow personally in a distributed company?
That's the number one thing. I think sometimes, you know, you go in. So even when I went back to study psychotherapy, went to help people, but I came out just having helped myself so much. So what we're really trying to encourage is, especially in the distributed kind of, is all the opportunities of doing that out there, trying to create that level of firstly vulnerability and openness, which I think starts from the top. We often have leaders sharing how they learn, their screw ups, their failures, and how they're learning from that. And then I think it's the cultivate of the conversations you have to create the opportunities for people to say, okay, I can go out and I can kind of learn this space that's a bit uncomfortable for me. You know, and we're even running stuff like psych safety and trying to understand that. And it all comes back down to, are you willing to put the mirror in front of your face and do the work, you know? And if you create a space that allows that and you feel comfortable to bring your true self, which is many things, I think that's where the opportunity, and it doesn't matter where you sit or where you are, as long as you have that trust. So again, it goes back down to your managers, as you talked about, your team. Do you feel open? Do you feel you can be honest? And that's a huge part of them being able to do the work and grow in the way we've all talked about.
Great. And Morgan and Gonçalo, and anyone in the room with us, please, if you have any questions, because if not, I'll carry on being nosy. So do put your questions in the chat. We still have a few minutes. And Morgan and Gonçalo, a word that Beth just used, conversations. And Morgan, you used that before. And Gonçalo, you've hinted at something around that. In a 100% distributed company with different time zones, how practically do those conversations look like, Gonçalo?
Well, for us, it's all async. I think that's a bit of a kind of like a part of our brand at this point. But something that's really cool around learning and async is that a lot of our communication is very thorough and thoughtful. We write a lot, like, you know, big paragraphs of things. So the nice thing about this is that we take time to put down our thoughts, refine them, edit them before we share them, which is nice, because when we're sharing the things we learn, it really prompts another reflection. Like, what exactly have we learned? How are we better off because of this? And how can we convey this message to the other people? So in terms of how we approach communicating this, it's also really helpful because it's usually long form, thoughtful communication.
Mm-hmm. And do you get much interaction around those thoughts? Does it vary? Do some topics get more interactions, more conversations around it than others? Or
Honestly, it's not high interaction, generally speaking. I think async is not the best tool for like high interaction, because I think what you're thinking about is kind of like, the real time thing of, bouncing ideas back and forth. And this takes a bit longer, generally speaking, but it's quite common for something interesting to pop up and then another conversation spins off just to focus on that. So, what did you mean by that? Like, can you tell me more about this? Yeah, that happens quite frequently.
Yeah. What do you mean by that? Tell me more about this. Isn't that a great role modeling question also? Why do you laugh, Morgan?
I'm taking a class right now modeled off of authentic relating, and it's called a meta relate. Anyway, it's not entirely relevant to this, but it was just interesting to me because these are prompt questions that have come up a lot recently in the last couple of weeks. I was going to tag on to what Gonçalo said and say that, a lot of our communication is also asynchronous. I think we're 11 time zones. I don't count anymore. I believe Gonçalo is in every time zone. And we leverage video a lot. So not just, when it's real time, but when you respond to somebody, yes, we have those thoughtful long form conversations, but we also record video. We use a variety of tools, and my preference is Loom, but I think that each format has its place, right? So I really like that when I'm watching someone's video response, I can get a sense of their voice, their body language, and all of those cues that maybe you wouldn't necessarily have in writing, where our language of operation is English, but I'm only one of two native English speakers on the team. So I would say that generally the proficiency is quite high, but we run into miscommunication around maybe idiomatic turns of phrase and things like this. So being able to correct yourself in real time and asynchronous video is a really nice way to share.
Nice. And with that thought, so I'm going to start wrapping it up, saying, of course, something that we've all had to learn who've been in this space and the people is to develop all these new ways of communicating and having the choice and learning how to choose how we communicate. Before it was in person, for some of us, the phone like this, the letters, take a few days. And now we have this choice. That's a huge learning curve also, that actually some of us, we've just learned it as we went along. So panelists, I'm going to ask you to be thinking about a little 30-second wrap up from each of you. And we'd like to hear from each of you. So Marcus, kick us off.
I'll try to be short. I think I won't say a specific thing on how to choose, but I think it's important to understand that in distributed companies, they're all humans that we work with, and each of those humans is different. Not everyone likes to watch a video. Not everyone likes to watch an essay of things. Combining things, understanding who you're communicating with, I think is very important.
Thank you. Beth?
Yeah, I would probably just say, I think especially as you just said there, Pilar, adapting into this new world, try and pick one or two things that you think will be like the low-hanging fruit. I think a lot of companies are, okay, we're going to move to Loom and we're going to set up Slack, and there's so many things going on, and you're not seeing then, because of A, it results in a B. So I'd say just pick one or two things and do it really well with feedback, as Marcus said, and focus on that, and you'll start to see the rewards.
Thank you, Beth. Gonçalo, do you want to?
I'm going to maybe go back a little bit to something we discussed early on and talk again about leading by example. And this spans to everything. Like if you have a learning day, all of your leadership team should be leveraging this learning day. The month thing I mentioned, we have everybody doing this, from the CEO to everybody in the company. So, and this is really important. Like there is really no better way to show that something is important than everybody engaging with it. And another one, it's just like a very old joke. I think learning has been a big thing for humans for millennia now. And I remember when I was in college, there was this joke going around, which is the corporate dilemma, which is asking, what if we train our people and then they leave? And the worst thing, is what if you don't train them and they stay? So I think leaders should think about this when they think about the incentives and how willing they are to create this space for their teams.
Thank you, Gonçalo. And Morgan?
Yeah, I'd like to continue about what Marcus was saying about how people behind the screen, essentially, like all of these people, especially since the context of what we're sitting in is this pandemic work, and there are many, many people who are new to something that the five of us here have done for a long time or are very comfortable doing. My best advice is to learn your tools, the tools that you not just you know how to do the work, but really, really dig into the tools that you're using to not just communicate with your team, but anything new that's coming into your remote work sphere. And then also to really try to work louder and work more proactively with people on your team, because the death of remote work is silence, and we all have to get a lot better at whatever type of communication you are comfortable with and you want to receive learning or you want to share it is super, super important to not just survive, but excel in a remote environment.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, panelists, audience, thank you very much for your attention and your earlier contributions. Thank you to the panel, Beth Maguire, Gonçalo Silva, and Morgan Legge, and Marcus Wermuth. And thank you to the wonderful dynamic organizers of Agile Tour London for making the space for this conversation today. Thank you very much. And thank you, listeners. Thank you very much. I know you're all out there. I would love to hear from you. I'm very happy to connect on LinkedIn, but do let me know that you are listening to the podcast, because I don't just connect with anyone, because I've had so much attempts at cold calling basically on LinkedIn that I'm now quite choosy. But I'm very, very happy to connect with you. So I would like to also to say hello to some regular listeners like Catherine, who I recently worked with. And also, I think you pronounce it Ami. And she is someone who connected on LinkedIn, not just to say hello and that she was enjoying the show, but also at some point she sent me a recent piece of research that I actually hadn't come across. And it's called Why Working from Home Will Stick. And it's research by Jose Maria Barrero, Nicholas Bloom, and Stephen J. Davis. And it's from December the 10th, 2020. What I can't see is where it was published. But it's called, if you Google it, Why Working from Home Will Stick. And you might remember, those of you who've been in this space for a while, Nicholas Bloom was the person who did that research for Stanford about, I don't know how many, 4 or 5 years ago, where they looked at how working from home had increased the productivity in a call center in China, I think it was. So it's quite exciting that finally we've got some new research. They surveyed 15,000 Americans to investigate whether, how, and why working from home will stick after COVID-19. And I'm just going to read from the abstract. They provide evidence of 5 mechanisms behind this persistent shift to working from home: diminished stigma, hurrah, better than expected experiences working from home, good to hear, investments in physical and human capital, enabling working from home, reluctance to return to pre-pandemic activities, and innovation supporting working from home. I love that there has been innovation. So just a reminder, of course, that remote work does not always mean working from home, but in particular, this study was looking at working from home. So I encourage you to Google this, Why Working from Home Will Stick. And thank you very much, Ami, for sending this through. Listeners, do let us know you're listening, and if you want to share anything with other listeners. Just a little add-on from some of the stuff that came up on the panel. I have to say that Morgan has been helping me to understand Asana. Asana is a project management tool, which some of you might be using. And I haven't found it intuitive, but other people have and love it. So this just goes to show that there's no app that's easy. It just depends on whether your own way of organizing yourself coincides with how the app is laid out. But I have been helping a team introduce Asana to make their workflow visible. That's the tool they chose. And so I'm learning. And it's just been a blast working with Morgan from a distance. She's in Canada, I'm in London, and she's just been helping me. She's set some tasks for me of things to do. She recorded herself on Loom, which is an application where you can share short videos for screen capturing. It's quite useful. I've loved it. So everything she said on the panel, as well as all the other panelists, actually, she role models and she practices day to day. So that was absolutely wonderful. All right, listeners, let us know how you are learning, if you have anything to say around that, or just tell us you're listening. And we're at the end of the show. I'm just going to roll out all the calls to action of our show. If you haven't subscribed to the show, if you're listening to us on the web, we are on every podcast app. We are on Amazon Music. We are on Spotify, of course, Apple Podcasts. So look for 21st Century Work Life, and we're there. On virtualnotdistant.com, we have the show notes beautifully summarized by Maya, and you can sign up there to our monthly newsletter with reading and listening recommendations. If you are on LinkedIn, we have a page that Becky looks after, and our Twitter account is Virtual Teamwork with a 0 instead of an O for work. My email address is pilar@virtualnotdistant.com, and that is it. Thank you very much for listening. A big thank you for listening to the 21st Century Work Life podcast produced by Virtual Not Distant. If you have something to add to the conversation, let us know through the contact form over at virtualnotdistant.com. I have been your host, Pilar Orti, and I'm signing off now. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, enjoy.